7.7 billion goes on patients suffering from related complications such as kidney and nerve damage. BBC News.
Good morning, this is Radio 4. Baby boomers came of age when the accepted knowledge was that if they worked hard, they could be better off than their parents. The generations which followed assumed this truth would continue into the future indefinitely. With the crash of 2008, the upward mobility people assumed was their right evaporated, and it's unlikely to return. Martin Wolf explains why the future is not what it used to be.
What does the future hold for you, your children and your grandchildren? New technologies appear to offer the promise of boundless wealth, but recent experience is one of stagnant living standards and rising inequality. What explains this striking contrast? I'm Martin Wolf, Chief Economics Commentator of the Financial Times. I'm going to examine today's confusing picture and ask what it might look like in the decades ahead. One thing is already clear. The future is not what it used to be. Technological change is always the most powerful long-term driver of the future. Our era is no different. Today's new technologies, particularly digital technologies, are set to transform the way our world works and the jobs we'll be doing. Andrew Mcafee of MIT offers a telling illustration of what's coming.
It seems very likely that technology is going to have impact both lower and higher on the skill range. At the low range, burger flipper is American shorthand for a job that you really don't want, but it's really always available. There's a company that's just announced a completely automated burger making robot that will turn out 360 completely customized burgers an hour. I haven't tasted one yet, but my guess is if they don't taste good tomorrow, they'll get better very, very quickly. At the end of the skill range, we are seeing things like software that can diagnose cancer by looking at images better than human pathologists right now. So I see enough examples like this, and it indicates to me that we're going to see digital encroachment in areas where we have not yet seen it.
Andrew Mcafee of MIT is one of two authors of a much-noted book, The Second Machine Age. It foretells the age of thinking machines. Its authors predict that the coming revolution will transform the world of work. How will humans fare in their race against the machines? Some will win, but many will lose out. MIT professor Erik Brynjolfsson is the book's co-author.
The extent to which the technology is biased and affects some groups versus others makes it much more difficult to cope with. You get much more disruption. You can get great amounts of wealth created for some people and joblessness for other people, and that's disruptive for the economy. And it's likely that that is the way the technology will evolve. There are people who have been able to leverage their talents and skills and become, well, literally billionaires because of them being able to use that technology in increasingly winner-take-all markets. We're seeing the rise of power laws in the distribution of income, where you get some extremely large fortunes and then you get a long tail of people who have a harder time making money. It's likely in the digital era we'll see more of that. We see it already in music, software, media, and those same economics are coming to manufacturing, finance, retailing, and perhaps even education. I want to stress that much of the economics are very, very good. I mean, we will have enormous bounty. We will have access to some of the best cancer specialists, some of the best art, some of the best education, some of the best in every category that we couldn't have had access to before. But the people who were the 5th or 10th or 30th best now aren't needed as much as they were before. And that is going to be very disruptive.
Yet this is not novel. According to Robert Gordon, professor of economics at Northwestern University, the impact of new technologies has been far greater in the past.
We've seen, I think, the great fruits of digitalization often called the third industrial revolution. We've had the revolution in the office, where everything now is available to you on a flat screen. But that transition was finished about 10 years ago. And in contrast, think of the different dimensions of the second industrial revolution of the late 19th century, where you had the invention of electricity and all the things that made possible, including high-rise buildings and urban density. You had the invention of the motor vehicle. You had the information and communications going from the telephone, the radio, the motion picture, complete change along that dimension. You had fundamental changes in medicine, in hygiene, and what I call the networked house. In 1870, the house was isolated from the rest of the world. By 1929, the urban American house had 5 connections to the outside world that did not exist before: electricity, gas, telephone, running water, and sewers. That was the kind of change that made the world entirely different on a day-to-day basis. And what we're seeing now is convenience and incremental change.
Robert Gordon is right. We have experienced huge transformative revolutions in the past. So far, at least, the changes the new technologies are bringing are nothing like as big as those brought by electricity or indoor plumbing a century ago. So are human beings as vulnerable to machines as enthusiasts argue? Professor Gordon thinks not.
I go through every day looking at every human being with whom I come in contact, and I ask the question, just automatically, will this person be replaced by a robot? And if so, when? You just would not believe how seldom I find anybody who can be replaced by a robot. Let's take your example of the driverless truck. We have 2 large worldwide delivery services called UPS and FedEx. A UPS driver drives around the United States in small neighborhoods in a big brown truck. That driver does other things besides drive. That driver hops out of the truck, goes to the back, finds the package, and carries, running or walking, that package into a building if it's an office, or up to a porch if it's a house, and knows just where to put it. We don't have robots yet that combine the multitasking of ability to drive a truck, to hop out, to find the package, and to know where to put it on the porch. We are just a long way from that. We have robots that are great at single tasks, like winning at chess, or robots that can walk but can't think. Inevitably, at some point in the far, far future, we will have multifunctioning robots that can replace some human activity, but not much. We had a great burst of technical change that lasted a disappointingly short period of time in the United States between about 1996 and 2004. This was the period when we had the birth of the Internet, the World Wide Web, and e-commerce, and that was indeed a revolutionary change, but it was only along one dimension.
Robert Gordon's view is informed by his deep reading of the past, but there are other perspectives. Our picture of the future is always blurred. Tyler Cowen of George Mason University is the author of The Great Stagnation and most recently Average is Over. Professor Cowen thinks that technologies will be transformative, but are also likely to benefit a large minority while harming the majority.
There's a core question if you're a worker, and that is, when you work with a computer, do you and the computer make each other more valuable, or are you competing against the computer? And people are falling more and more on one side of that divide or another. And I think if you're competing against the computer, your prospects are not so bright. Now, a lot of people can work more productively with the computer, but of course that's not everyone. So I think we're headed toward a future where a minority, but a quite large minority of workers are extremely well off and have wonderful lives, and then you have a larger share of the population having more or less stagnant or slightly declining wages. That's what I see for our immediate future, and in fact that's what our last 15 years in the United States, and also to some extent in the United Kingdom, has looked like. I think the key event going on right now is a thinning out of the middle class. But I don't think poverty is an unending trap. Rates of social mobility are not falling. And I'm actually less worried than a lot of people about the top 1%. I think a lot of them are fantastically creative and productive, and they should earn high incomes. But nonetheless, for me, the core problem is people seem to be doing either really well or just being stuck. And in the longer run, I worry about the stability of this thinning out of the middle class, because my country and yours, they're both based on a kind of middle class ethos. And I think we're seeing it as much in Europe as in the United States. The US arrives a lot of places first, for better and for worse, and Europeans are somewhat naive to think this is mainly an American problem.
If Tyler Cowen's predictions prove right, the economic and political bargain underpinning the stability of Western democracies, that those who work hard should be better off than their parents, will disintegrate. Carl Frey of Oxford University has tried to calculate the potential impact on employment precisely. He co-wrote a recent report saying that over the next 20 years, 47% of American jobs would be vulnerable to computerization. This research focused on the United States, but technology is universal. Where the US goes, other nations seem sure to follow.
If we look back a couple of decades, 30% of employment used to be in manufacturing, now it's 10%. So it doesn't necessarily imply that we're going to have technological unemployment, but it does imply that we will need to create a lot of jobs in order to make up for that. There's no single occupational category which is entirely safe from computerization. That means that we are now seeing jobs disappearing all across the spectrum of the labor market.
How revolutionary will this be? Because after all, certainly if you're my sort of age, I've seen a lot of jobs that used to exist already be replaced by computers. There used to be an enormous army of clerks who used to do accounts. We used to get people who put petrol in one's car. And of course, you see in manufacturing companies already huge increases in productivity and the reduction in the number of people employed. So is this genuinely revolutionary, or is it just a further evolution of trends in a way which in different ways we've seen over the last 2 centuries?
Well, I think this time is different, and I don't mean that in the Rogoff and Reinhardt sense. I mean it's in the actual sense. The reason that I believe that it is different is if we look at what is happening over the past couple of decades, we've been seeing a lot of middle-income jobs disappearing. But we're also seeing a lot of high-income job growth. And the way this dynamic works is essentially that when computers substitute for routine work, it also complements cognitive work. And once a high-tech job is created, people go out in the local economy and spend their money on services. So you also have a lot of job growth on the bottom end of the income distribution. Now, what we are finding is that looking forward, many of these low-income jobs are actually susceptible to computerization, which means that many of the safe havens for low-skilled workers before are not going to be that, presumably, in the future. And that means that some fairly substantial skill upgrading is going to be required throughout the economy in order to maintain a certain employment level. That is the main challenge we are seeing.
Technology drives productivity. That's the economist's name for how much output each worker produces. Productivity is, in turn, the most important determinant of any country's average standard of living. Yet there is a puzzle. We see new technologies everywhere, but disturbingly, not in measured productivity. This contrast partly explains why future prosperity now looks so uncertain. The same was true 3 decades ago, when Robert Solow, a Nobel laureate in economics, remarked, "You can see the computer age everywhere, but in the productivity statistics." Erik Brynjolfsson, co-author of The Second Machine Age, tries to explain this productivity puzzle.
There's a terrible mismeasurement problem, and it's getting worse. Digital goods, to the extent that they're available for free, don't show at all in productivity statistics. So the free goods like Wikipedia, Facebook, Google, the ability to detect cancer with apps on iPhones, these have tremendous value, hundreds of billions of dollars worth of value to consumers, but they have zero impact on the GDP or productivity statistics. And perhaps most importantly, we know that when new technologies hit on the scene, especially breakthrough technologies and general purpose technologies, it takes decades, even up to a century, for their full impact to be had. With previous technologies, we know that, for instance, electricity took about 30 years before it showed up significantly in the productivity statistics. Andy and I are seeing some amazing breakthroughs in many industries, and we are quite confident that things like self-driving cars, the ability to talk to our computers and have them respond back, the ability to do unstructured problem solving will have profound effects on the economy, and it's not hard to predict that that is going to happen, but we wouldn't expect the productivity statistics to instantly reflect that.
No doubt there is enormous welfare gain in all of the free stuff that you and I and everyone else use every day on the internet. The ease of finding information is profound and welfare enhancing. But it's always been true that we have omitted from GDP the fruits of the great inventions.
Robert Gordon of Northwestern University in Chicago explains that mismeasurement of